Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Hammer, and today I want to take you on the journey I experienced in experiencing literature, not just through the assignments, but through how I grew as a reader, a writer, and honestly as a person. This presentation is called Observing Myself as a Critical Reader, but it's really the story of how my reading practices, my confidence, and even my creativity changed and improved over the course of this semester. My journey began with completing numerous reader response theory documents, and my favorite one I worked with was with Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried. Instead of just reading the story, I had to respond to it. I had the ability of sitting with each one of the characters' emotions, their trauma, and especially their military experiences through finding quotes and explaining them in depth. The reader response document was more than just what did I think of this book. Rather, it involved numerous reading strategies and specific questions we had to respond to. My favorite one in particular is what our class called the cultural studies lens, which pushed me to search for meanings behind the unfamiliar, such as weapon names, war slang, and specific references I have never heard before. The question I had to respond to was, what cultural or historical references are unfamiliar to you? I love this question as I really began to understand these references I did not know before. It was the first time I realized that reading can be detective work. When you don't understand a word or a reference, that confusion is actually an invitation to learn more. The reader response document showed me that understanding characters deeply comes from asking questions and responding to them with evidence. This ultimately became a theme for the whole semester, learning not to rush through a text, but to stop and think deeply about what is actually going on in the story. Then we moved on to critical analysis documents, and my favorite document I completed was with The Kite Runner by Khalid Hosseini. This assignment felt like a shift. We weren't just responding emotionally, we were breaking the story open and examining how it was built through numerous literary elements such as themes, conflicts, imagery, and much more. My focus was on the concrete element of conflict, which The Kite Runner is full of in every chapter of the novel. I had to focus on both internal and external conflict within chapters 8 through 11, and I chose the scene of Amir watching Hassan get raped, as well as Amir feeling bad for Baba losing everything he previously had through his wealth. Here's the explanation of both types of conflicts I interpreted. For internal conflict, I examined Amir's guilt, his longing for forgiveness, and his struggle with identity due to him watching Hassan get raped and not saying anything. And I also analyzed external conflict, which included the Taliban, the political turmoil, and the cultural tension embedded inside of Baba after moving to America and losing everything he used to have. The critical analysis approach taught me that stories are carefully engineered through numerous emotions. Themes and conflicts are not accidents. Authors place them carefully like puzzle pieces. Understanding that structure helped me read more intentionally, both for school and honestly for my own pleasure too. Of course, to understand the kite runner deeply, I relied heavily on reading strategies. This was one of the most hands-on part of my learning, as I would annotate almost every night for weeks. I underlined sentences, I circled words, I drew arrows pointing at specific words and annotations. I labeled metaphors, tracked themes, identified hundreds of pieces of visual imagery, and wrote comments all over the margins to have successful reading strategies. Professor Ohm's close reading tips, which you can see on the slide, became a guide for slowing down and noticing what I normally would have skipped past. These strategies made the book come alive, but they also made my reading process so much more intense. And that connects to my biggest challenge, which I'll talk about soon. One of Professor Ohm's best close reading tips I utilized was underlining, circling, or highlighting, which helped me immensely in utilizing reading strategies. But at this stage of the semester, reading felt like a conversation with the author. Every annotation was taking me back to the text. Another part of this journey was learning how reading connects to collaboration. I was introduced to the digital tool Microsoft Teams to run a group leader discussion for a Socratic seminar on the Kite Runner for chapters 8 through 11. I worked on this project with Evelyn Lee, Billy Mincher, Nailani, Sammy Gray, and Darren as seen in the photo. My group and I planned the session through the video chat on Microsoft Teams, and we ultimately discussed each of our roles during the in-person in-class discussion. We basically determined what literary element each one of us are going to present, as well as share a question we all have. What I realized during this process is that reading doesn't have to be silent or isolated. When we share our ideas, new interpretations emerged, things I would have never noticed alone. Using a digital tool like Microsoft Teams helped us plan ahead, communicate smoothly, and understand the novel from multiple perspectives, and it made the book more three-dimensional. This was not a class that had no connections. Rather, it connected directly to my first year writing seminar class, where we practiced identifying rhetorical devices in real pieces of writing. Rhetorical devices were a huge part of this class, especially in our annotations and critical analysis documents. I saw how rhetorical devices worked in my first year writing seminar class through assignments that analyzed my peers' work, and I started recognizing these devices inside the novels we read for English. This cross class connection made me a more observant reader. I wasn't just reading stories, I was seeing the craft behind them. In my first year writing seminar class, we were asked to pick and explain 3 rhetorical devices that could be useful when raising awareness about student specified issues at Sacred Heart, and the list reminded me of terms we use in experiencing literature, specifically the device illusion, which I utilized in my response for my first year writing seminar assignment. It is circled in red on the slides within the photos that I had to pick, and they also describe the device illusion in my peers' work. That was one of the biggest takeaways from the semester. Once you understand rhetorical devices, you cannot unsee them in literature, and they will always repeat in life. Now, I'll be honest, the biggest challenge this semester was definitely the weekly annotations in the Kite Runner. Every chapter demanded careful reading, close analysis, and detailed notes, and I was so extremely overworked. I would constantly dread doing the annotations because they took up so much time out of my day. And knowing myself personally, I tried to finish all of them for the assigned chapters in one day to reduce procrastination. And that meant hours of work. I always felt overwhelmed, the sticky notes, the scribbled margins, the constant stopping and restarting. It was stressful. And there were nights when I genuinely wondered if I could keep up. I definitely have over 500 annotations in that book, and the margins are covered in pencil markings. It began to turn the side of my hand gray when I would write them. You can visibly see this in the photos I provided on the slides, as the pages are absolutely covered in pencil markings and annotations. But looking back, that challenge forced me to become a stronger reader. I learned endurance, I learned patience, and I learned that deep reading takes time, but the payoff is understanding a book on a much deeper emotional level. Out of everything I did this semester, the most memorable moment was writing my short story about my father who unfortunately passed away when I was 13 years old. I titled this story 2 Years of Lies, 1 Second of Truth, which seriously touched me deeply to the soul. That assignment was not just a homework assignment. Rather, it had a huge mental impact on my personal life as I was able to craft the death of my father into a touching, heartwarming story that still makes me cry to this day. I remember every second of writing it, how insanely hard it was to write a sentence without crying. It took me days to finish as my heart broke with every tap of the keyboard. It was emotional, painful, healing, and empowering all at once. It reminded me that writing is not just academic, it can be a way to process your life and your memories. I'll never forget how it felt to put that story onto the page, and it will stay with me and my family long after this class ends, as I did send it to my mom and my family. And I did provide an image of a quote on the internet that says, "A daughter's biggest nightmare is losing her dad. I have lost mine, and I'm in such pain that no one can feel. I miss you, Dad." And that relates exactly to what I went through. And then came my aha moment. I realized that I could actually write poems. I always thought I was terrible at writing poems, and I literally could never do it. However, I also do think I may have got the gene of writing inspiring poems from my grandmother, as she does write poems and takes classes on how to write them in her free time. However, when we read The Sympathizer, something unexpected happened. The story's intensity, its voice, and its emotional depth about the narrator's emotional personal experience in the Vietnam War sparked a poem in my head almost instantly when we received the assignment. This was the moment I discovered a creative side of myself that I did not know I had. So if I had to summarize my journey as a critical reader in English 201, I would say this. I learned how to respond. I learned how to analyze. I learned how to annotate. I learned how to collaborate. I learned how to connect ideas across classes. I faced real challenges, but I also created work I'm proud of. And most importantly, I discovered new ways of expressing myself through stories, through responses, and even through poetry. This class didn't just teach me how to read books. It taught me how to read deeply, how to think critically, and how to find my own voice as a writer. Thank you.